You're in tune to 24/7 TV, where we bring you the latest developments in tech, music and culture. I'm Jimmy Kiriakou, this is DJ Fantasy, and that's Harry Shotter. Today we've got a very special guest, Mr. Alan D. Miller, co-founder of Truman Brewery, founder of the Vibe Bar, if you remember that, and also the chairman of the NTIA. Alan, welcome to 24/7 TV.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Could we also, NTIA, could you just let us know what that is and what it stands for?
Fantastic. I'll definitely do that. I'll do that first. How about that? So that's for the Nighttime Industries Association, and that really represents what we call like the ecosystem of a range of different activities: bars, clubs, pop-ups, festivals, but also the labels and the managers and the whole industry. But then on top of that, the relationship between that and another activity in nighttime. So that can also be takeaways and theatres and gyms and a whole range of others that are all kind of part of the nighttime infrastructure. So that's kind of like the Nighttime Industries reflects all of that. But we're particularly focused on clubs and bars and festivals that, the sort of people that will identify as being kind of contemporary music, because that's where a lot of this the issues that we've seen that you started off by talking about really come to play. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is a radical reduction of certain types of clubs, and a lot of it's to do with regulation, live music venues as well, but like overly tight regulation around licensing, imposing more and more conditions. Often it's to do with issues around resources, with policing and councils, and a thinking that like nightlife, bad things happen, antisocial behaviour, crime, rather than the enormous cultural contribution, the benefits, and the thing that makes sort of Britain so exciting.
So London's supposed to be a 24-hour city. There was the licensing laws that came into play a few years ago. I'm not really seeing that reflected in the clubs. I know the younger generation, a lot of them do go out. I know there's been a lot of press that says millennials don't go out, which is complete nonsense in my opinion. But what's your take on that? So even though these licensing laws are there, why have they been granted yet it actually really isn't coming to fruition with the clubs themselves?
It's a great question. I mean, when they passed the 2003 legislation that came out in 2005, it's 24-hour licensing across Britain, and the idea was to create a kind of environment where you could have all sorts of, they called it continental style drinking. So that was the idea, that you could have different times finishing, because everyone knows that if you have the day and night and different times of leaving, people can come and leave. There aren't pressure on things like cabs or others. And as you say, now we've got 24-hour night tube. But unfortunately, what's happened is very few councils grant 24-hour licences. And in London, we've seen some of them diminish or more pressure being put on them. And actually, the kind of cut off after 1 a.m, it's really difficult to go many places. So if you fly in from LA, you're in the studio, you're doing something, or if you're in the tech industry and you're working with Beijing and Sao Paulo and you come out, in Paris you can have a croissant and a glass of wine, or in Berlin you can go to Berghain anytime, day or night. But in London, everyone's a bit embarrassed, go, there's only one or two, not sure where to go. And so I think that what's happened is that there's been a kind of approach in councils, which is where licensing is really, the decisions are made, in the 33 boroughs in London and the over 400 in Britain, where people have seen nightclubs and late night activity as a problem or a drain on resources rather than benefits. And what we're really keen and conscious on doing, and I think some of the campaigns around Fabric and Bussy Building and Rara and others have tried to demonstrate, is that we can't imagine fashion without the dance floor and nightlife. We can't imagine our enormous musical contribution to the world and the next generation of talent without the dance floor and clubs. We can't imagine commercials and adverts and film. I mean, imagine them without contemporary music. Really, from the post-war period, from the Beatles onwards, it's all been on the dance floor. And in a way, what we want to do is repose that narrative and get policymakers and authorities to understand that, like British Council when they go out internationally, to talk about how brilliant nightlife is. It's like the 5th biggest industry now in Britain. We don't do coal mining and shipbuilding anymore. And in fact, I'm old enough to remember when Britain really was problematic on the weekends. The police joke with me, it used to be called Friday Fight Night. And the irony is that dance music and clubs have helped make Britain a more engaged, interactive, safer environment, not racist, not homophobic, all that stuff. We've actually improved it. And so I think it's about getting the people who make these decisions to understand it and see that we can work in partnership and not try and just kind of regulate or close it down.
Well, I think what I've seen myself is there's a lot more sort of daytime festival kind of basically stop by 9-10 o'clock at night, and with everyone being home by 11. That's the kind of the thought process behind it, which for me was a way of the councils kind of trying to control, like you say, you know, when you said that they brought out the 24-hour licensing, that was to stop everyone coming out at 2 o'clock in the morning and all the different bars all clashing together. So if you have staggered like closing times, you know what I mean? But it just does seem like, you know, I don't want to offend any councils here, but it does seem like they're not granting any of these things because they just don't want to have to like police it, you know what I mean? Which is like, which is quite sad. And like you said, you know, London is supposed to be the capital of the world, never mind just the capital of England. And how can it be if we've got a 24-hour tube and there's nothing, there's, you know, what they say 50% of clubs have shut down in the last 10 years, is that right?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, that's right, and a lot of clubs and live venues, and I think the thing is that a lot of it's about hearts and minds. You know, it isn't the case that we've gone beyond repair. We can do something. I mean, I think one of the things is that people themselves can have an impact. We ran a campaign called We Love Hackney when Hackney Council said, you know, 10 years ago, Hackney Council had a strapline, Destination Dalston, and they wanted people to go there because, you know, towns and cities recognise up and down the country, the nighttime economy, bars and clubs acts as a draw, brings people in, young people like it, generates regeneration. Yeah. So they did all that. And then what it became a bit like almost like a joke, ironically, like, oh, Hackney, like trendy. And then what happened was it became so successful, they then said, well, we want to have a curfew, no more new clubs or bars. And we're like, why? And they said, well, the residents have had enough. And we're like, what residents?
Well, that's why they moved there.
Yeah.
Bingo. Well, that's why they moved there. And also the people that are there end up getting jobs and it creates more revenue and it's a good news story. So we said, what residents? And then we kind of engaged in a campaign to get residents in Hackney residents. And over 5,500 of them responded in a couple of weeks. And overwhelmingly, they said, we love nightlife. We want more of it. It's really great. And it lights places up. It's kind of who we are. And I think then the council recognise, because sometimes they hear from one or two people that are vocal. But then there's a recognition. It is really about hearts and minds, having a conversation. It's important, I think, we don't sort of throw stones, but recognise that the police, they've been asked to deal with cyber crime, terrorism and paedophilia, and they have 40% cuts. So they're worried. But the thing is, don't worry by shutting down clubs and thinking that's a drain of resources. Work with us. We're the eyes and ears. We're part of the community. We actually prevent crime. What do we want? A Detroit where there's no one out on the streets. So it's the thinking behind it. And like with councils as well, to them to recognise that actually we've all got to get together. That's why the Nighttime Commission has been really good, because we've been very involved.
Is that the new mayor has brought
Night
in?
Star, right?
Yeah.
Well, the Nighttime Commission with the Night Star. So the Nighttime Commission is like about 20 people around the table. It includes the police, the Home Office, the TfL, Transport for London, the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime, and music organisations, the theatres, and it's all of us working together in partnership. At first, it was a bit, everyone's sort of like, and you have to get and you have to sit with people who disagree and or want to work out solutions.
Yeah, to create the solutions.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a very important move. And even though that was being set up and implemented whilst the fabric issue came up, I think what it did was it made people realise it's tricky, and we need to work together. And with the Night Star as well, the idea is that we have to work together to find solutions. And I think that, you know, that model can work in Manchester and Liverpool, elsewhere. They've got mayoral elections. But the nightlife and clubs and bars, you know, if people think about whoever the artist is, right? I mean, a Tiny Temper or Wiley or Adele or anyone, it's impossible to conceive of them without what we do, without dance floors and clubs and, you know, DJs and how that whole thing, not only in Britain, but it's gone around the world. I mean, if you think about UK exports, that's at the heart of it.
I always say that is, you know, we've done a lot. I mean, you know, people just look at like America for hip hop, but the UK has exported a lot of great music worldwide, going back as far as the Beatles, even probably beyond that, but before that. But, you know, one thing is obviously Fabric closed and it reopened, and you were were part of that whole movement to get it reopened. And I remember at the time when it went down, my thought was, oh my God, like if Fabric goes, I worry about the others.
Yeah, the knock-on effects.
The domino effects that will happen. What was that like, that campaign for you? Because I remember when you were, you know, I mean, I contacted you pretty much straight away, and we spoke online on Twitter, and you know, what was it like to be, you know, a part of that? I mean, basically, thank you from us, from the clubbing community. Trust me, you know, we needed someone like you to go, no, wait a minute. And the fact that you have had so much experience in dealing with councils and everything, you know, if me and Harry rocked up, they'd look at us and go, "We wearing baseball caps and you know, like big jackets and that," you know. So what was it like to kind of be like?
Well, you know, I think that for the whole of Britain and internationally, fabric's one of those things. It wasn't just a spin. They're like the jewel in the crown. They represent a lot for a lot of people. Integrity of music, what the whole electronic scene is, dance music, what it means today. I mean, I grew up and was very involved in dance music from a long time, from its inception, the whole acid house experience. It all shaped, and it really, I'm not to be flippant, I remember Britain that was racist and sexist, and how that actually helped.
Well, acid house changed that, right?
Exactly. And how that's then percolated, and what happened when legislation stopped that, but then it went into the clubs and licensing, and how we've got to where it is. And fabric retains that element of independence, but also the inspiration where artists and everyone gets together. They love music, people go there. So there was genuinely massive concern, and I think that it was an intersection of a number of issues, right? There's a conversation about drugs in Britain, and it's there, and people do them, and who's going to be responsible?
But they do them whether they're in a club or at their house.
Exactly.
What are they going to do? Are the police and the government going to go into everyone's houses and shut them down?
Exactly. Well, I think that's the question, because you know we've seen since that things like Heathrow Airport, where even people that are employees, no one said whether drugs were being brought in. No one said shut Heathrow down. We've seen prisons where you can control everything, but drugs are coming in and out. I think it's a question for society, and it was a really good and bad example of how things are being imposed on venues that are issues for society. So you could ask, well, how did the drugs even get to fabric in the first place? Like, why is it only that the conversation is about fabric? People say it's a licensed venue. You say, yeah, but you know, there's a conversation for Britain. I think the thing is that it was a very shocking moment. It was very worrying. You know, we helped bring together Philip Colvin, who's a QC, who represented them, who did a really sterling job. I think the fact that so many people in Britain and internationally had their voices heard, the people, you can't underestimate, you know, local councillors, sometimes they're voted in by 1,000 or 2,000 people. When you start getting 10, 20, 100, 150, 200, 300,000 people, and then they're contributing towards money to a campaign as well. That has a moral weight, and also that has a financial weight, because most people could not afford to have done what Fabric did. And I think that the recognition that internationally so many people wrote about it, and then you get people like the Royal Albert Hall tweeting and commenting about it, and then you think, well, actually, you know, this is really part of who we are.
It's our culture, isn't it?
And you know, when they, you know, the terrible incidents at the Bataclan in Paris, and there were terror, and the whole world quite rightly said, we're not going to allow nihilists to shut us down or make us scared to go out or whatever. But I think we have to have a similar approach. It's who we are. Right, this is where we fall in love, where we meet people, where we get inspired, where
culture is the heartbeat of any city.
Exactly. So I think that it was very shocking. I think it has to be said as well that even though Fabric has reopened again with lots of really difficult conditions, but it's an amazing operation there. But whilst that happened, and when they reopened, we've had a summary review, which means they can close the venue down straight away, imposed on Mode, which was originally Subterranea in Acklam Road, right, for old fogies like me who can remember it, and then the Supper Club and all of that. I mean, it's a great venue. And it was closed down on serious disorder, not even a crime, right? No one was reported for a crime. No one was arrested. They had what I would call, what is it? I mean, it wasn't a little kerfuffle. I don't know what to call it, right? It wasn't even a punch-up. But it was closed down on the basis of that. Even though the Home Office is now saying you shouldn't immediately close places down. We've just seen a similar situation happen when they were closed for several weeks, where words are used where you don't quite sure what happened, rather than saying how do we actually, if someone does something in English law, they're responsible for a crime, so you hold them responsible. You don't shut the club down. And I think that, so whilst it's been fantastic that, you know, people got involved and they challenged the situation with Fabric and we got back up on our feet, and that was very inspiring for everyone, and how much people came behind that, and it really was the people that got involved and did all of that. There's also a note of caution and concern where that becomes like a bit of a precedent where you like close things down straight away, and we have to be vigilant. And with people that are small, that don't have as much attention, we have to keep that. That's why we've got this campaign, Save Nightlife. And SaveNightlife.com, we encourage the public to get involved, and it sends an email to their local MP and councillor to say how much nightlife means to them.
So I sign up to Save Nightlife, give my details, and I can basically give direct information about things that are going on around me.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome.
And when you say, you know, why it's important to you, and then those councillors, when they start getting those emails, it means a lot, because also a lot of young people don't vote today. But it's a double-edged sword, right? They start thinking, hold on, there's all these people in my constituency and they really like this, and they might vote, but they're having a voice. And I've just seen the fabric thing, and now we have a little bit of leverage because we can say, we try and work in partnership, but we can also say, well, we can campaign, and most people are conscious of what happened with fabric, and no one really likes that. It was a bit of a blow up of a whole thing, right? It became a bit embarrassing, I think, for quite a few people, because you think, gosh, it's not ideal. And so basically the idea is that we can, you know, help push and pull and all work together, but also I think the people's voice of this, people love music, right? They love DJs and producing artists. They have an emotional connection to the work. They come and they, you know, if everyone thinks back about their first place that they first, you know, whether it was on a radio or they went into a club or a bar and they saw their first DJ or they heard their first track, it's a really monumental moment, right? Why, you know, if you talk about why you guys got involved in the music industry, those things are often paramount, right? And I think that bit in the connection that we have with the public, as well as talking to politicians and MPs, but that bit's really important, and the people having their voice.
There's one thing which I thought, and I thought about this, you know, around the time of the fabric thing. What I think has happened is people that are in positions of power within government, whether it's like local authority or big government, there seems to be a void of. You'd think that people that went to acid house parties would have, you know, they've had their sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 years of doing that and then went in. There seems to be a bit of a gap. It seems to be that the people that are in them positions sort of bypass the whole rave industry, so won't have that
affinity with the culture.
Yeah,
you're saying. Right,
so the thing is maybe we need more people. You know, I mean, everybody can't rely on you to be, you can't be everywhere, you know, but there definitely seems to be a sort of a generational gap, I suppose, for people that are in that kind of culture, in sort of local authorities that can go, hey, you know what, listen, don't, you know, look, explain to these people like what's happening. I mean, is there anything we could do to change it? I'm not putting myself up for government.
Is that
well, I think there are. I mean, I think there's things like the night czars, but I think like local, I mean,
can I ask you a question? Because I'm interested on the Night Czar thing. I saw the whole campaign. I even saw the job advertised, and I looked at it and I thought, that's a big job. Yeah. And I didn't really see a huge amount of resource going into that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a big job, and so really what's happened is it's been split between Amy Lame and the Night Czar in the first year, but 2.5 days is not really enough for the amount of work. But you know, she's got to get around 33 boroughs and do a whole lot of work. But it's a great start. But
does she have a team, or is it just her?
Yeah, so there's a team, and then there's also like Philip Colvin is now the chair of the Night Time Commission, and that's a combo movement really. And I think the thing is that I think we have to manage expectations. I mean, a lot of people will have immediate demands and they want to see things happen. And I'm the most impatient person in the world, but we also have to recognise that there's a process and we have to get things done. And so I think that we all have to keep vocal. You know, we're an organisation that we sort of say things that sometimes other people won't. And the reason why that is because we genuinely have been born from this movement and we feel passionately about it. And it's not just a kind of strapline. And one of the things I try and say to people in politics and everyone is tell the truth and be honest, because even if it's really you're worried, you have to be a bit courageous, because firstly, you'll always be held accountable. Secondly, if you start flanneling, right, the public, one of the problems is today is the public generally, a lot of the time, don't have that much confidence in people that are in politics. And they think it's just a spin and just another thing. And you think, but if you can actually be honest and say, look, this is where we are, this is where we want to get to. And then I think you get a certain amount of integrity and respect. And I think to your point, I mean, I'd say to people, stand up. We want as many people as possible to be involved. I mean, not only across, you know, Manchester, Liverpool, Peterborough and Glasgow, the different cities that are having mayoral elections, have our voices heard. They're going to be council elections. Ask your MP, write a letter, get involved in Save Nightlife. We want as many people to help us as possible. And to be engaged, and the more people that do that, the better. And actually, if people want to stand, people stand because they care about the environment, they care about, social care. Great. If you care, the thing about nightlife is that it goes to the heart of the future of cities and towns in Britain. If we get that piece right and we work well, this is about urban planning. I like the Renaissance, right? That idea that we can all work. We have like really inspiring artistic aspirations, and we can be really ambitious and bold. And we can give a lead, right, and say, look, okay, so why don't we have some 24-hour destination hubs around London and around the UK? So we have nightclubs that can own their spaces in really cheap land, £2 or £3 a square foot, where no one goes at the moment. Then we can have restaurants and clubs and bars there. We can have developers who work together with us. The councils get taxes. right? You get 24. Everyone who moves in there knows it's happening. There's no complaints and everyone's making money, and everyone they don't get kicked out once it's successful because they own the spaces. Then you create new hubs as London and other cities.
It's like an organic ecosystem developing.
Exactly.
Whereas now what's been happening is you've got all these cultural venues that have been closed down, converted into residential properties, and what you've done there is people have moved to an area because of the heartbeat, because of the culture. The culture disappears. You're just going to have neighbourhoods of just flats. And I think that's the thing that really bothers me, and I've seen that over the last few years. And what you've just said there, I think is a really interesting concept.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is that we have a challenge in Britain, and particularly in London, but across Britain, which is that we need more housing. I'd say 5 million new houses, but we need hundreds of thousands of new houses. We need young people can't really afford them. There's not enough supply, and whether it's to rent or to own, we just need more of them. But that should not be at the sacrifice, as you quite rightly say, of venues. Yeah. If you go to China, it's really interesting, or places like that, you see these whole new areas of cities. They're very ambitious, they're building them up. And there's no reason why we can't retain things like venues and clubs within those developments and think smartly about how we... But that's about us all being around the table and thinking, like you say, if you suck out some of the heart of something and just replace it, it's going to be a problem. But if you can shape and curate it, it's like a work of music, right? We have to curate it, we have to compose it. And I think we've got a seat at the table now, right? So we've got a seat at the table, but we have to keep doing it. And as many people that can be involved as possible. And the thing is about DJs and producers, enormously, I'd say one of the most important groups of people, because like the public love you, they love what goes on with that. There's a connection, and also seen as really independent because you love music and all of that. And it's similarly, we're getting like labels and managers and artists all involved with our campaign. But across the board, I think even being vocal like you've been on Twitter and everything, that we wouldn't want to underestimate how much resonance that has, because it spreads among people.
Yeah,
definitely. But I mean, I think what you're doing is is commendable. Again, thank you. I know I speak for many when I say that, because
across all genres.
Not just drum and bass, just the music and nightlife in general. What is your plans for the NTIA? Yeah. Everyone. It's very important, trust me.
Nighttime Industry Association.
Yeah.
Got it.
What is your plans? How do you see the next sort of 5 years like developing, not just here in London, obviously, basically for the UK?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, we've got a few things that we're doing. We are, like we've done in London, we've got some hubs. So in Manchester, we work very closely. On our board is Sasha from the Warehouse Project, and we are working to have Manchester's been very good in many ways, but have more of an influence there. So we have a national strategy for Glasgow. This year is 30 years of the sub club in Glasgow. Right. So we're working with them, looking at what that will mean as a city over the next few years. And Liverpool as well, you mentioned housing and all that. There's been some tensions around new housing. Liverpool needs that, but also some of the key clubs there. Liverpool famous worldwide. I mean, you can't think of a more famous music city in some ways. I think that our goal is like Nashville and Austin and other places that have become recognised internationally, or Vegas in a different way, for being a music city or for doing things. That our policymakers begin to understand what we're doing. So our goal is threefold. One, save nightlife, get people really involved, the public. Two, over the next 2 years to consolidate having sort of night czars in different cities and have that part of the language with research that we put out, policymakers and lobbyists. And then three, to have both a national profile and internationally. We've developed relationships with people like Mirik Milan in the nighttime area of Amsterdam. I was just speaking in Mumbai with people in India looking at nightlife and what it means, and similarly in the States, creating an international network that we can share our resources and really reflect and help inform policymakers. I think in the end, in a way, two things should happen. We should become moribund, right? Because what should happen is people who are in authorities and policymakers should all understand all this, and there won't be need for the NTIA. But also that it becomes part of the language of people that are running cities and countries up and down the country. So they really recognise the value and part of this education. So over this next period, that's really our goal, and using research and implementing things. For instance, without talking too much, I've got an event next week we're doing with another big organisation who represent people like the Royal Opera House and the Globe and Shakespeare's Globe. And they, as well as having 24-hour art galleries and museums and late-night theatre, they are very vocal about how important nightlife is to their venues, tourism, destination, culture. So we want to keep winning hearts and minds, working together with people in Britain and internationally and making that all happen.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for coming in. Is there anything you want to end with, an announcement or anything going on? That, you just mentioned something just then that you want to tell our viewers?
Well, I think, I did like to encourage everyone to join savenightlife.com.
Yeah.
Savenightlife.com, everyone.
Yeah, and then tweet and tell everyone, and you can hashtag it Save Nightlife. And this is really about what we all do together. This is kind of a movement of us. So, yeah.
Alan Miller, thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Excellent.